City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, Design.
A warm welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars, now in their 26th year, coming to you from the new Graduate Center of the City University of New York. These seminars offer a rare opportunity to explore with the panelists the realities of working in the theater. This afternoon is devoted to the Design Seminar, those wonderful people that create the magic that brings live theater to you. We will learn something about how and why these designers became professionals, their work ethic, and their reasons for being in the theater. We hope that you will enjoy and learn from today's experience. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing, and so, quickly, let me introduce our moderators for the seminar, Professor and critic Tish Dates, and Professor of Theater at UCLA, and a working scenic and lighting designer, Neil Peter Jampoulos. Tish, would you start right away, please?
Yes, thank you. To my right is lighting designer Michael Chybowski. Michael has designed several shows for Laurie Anderson, most recently Moby Dick and Other Stories. In September 1999, he received the Hughes Design Award for Cymbeline at the Delacorte Theater in Central Park and for Margaret Edson's Pulitzer Prize winner, Wit. Next to Michael is the legendary Ann Roth, costume designer for at least 100 plays on Broadway, in regional theaters, and off-Broadway. She's been nominated for several Tonys for Crucifer of Blood, The Royal Family, and The House of Blue Leaves. In her spare time, she has designed 70 films, and she won the Oscar for Best Costume Design for The English Patient. Neil.
Hi. On my left, first is David Hayes, one of the very few candidates for the title of Great American Designer. After a brief 35 years as the founding artistic director of the National Theater of the Deaf, he is now a best-selling writer. And before he left our design fraternity, he produced 50 wonderful set or lighting designs on Broadway, some 30 ballets for George Balanchine and others at the New York City Ballet, and operas. Along with Robert Edmund Jones, he's the designer most closely associated with the plays of Eugene O'Neill. Okay. To his left is Abe Jacob, a pioneer in the film of Broadway sound design and one of those rare talents whose best work works best when it goes unremarked. A master of his craft, he's made such sound-heavy musicals as Jesus Christ Superstar and Evita sound just right, while making operas for the New York City Opera sound natural and unamplified. He's also the best sound designer I've ever worked with. And to his left is Greg Meeh. If it's a bomb, tear gas, infernos, blinding flashes, and smoke you're looking for, a short trip to the Brooklyn studios of Joachim and Meeh will get you that and much more. Better yet, visit one of the many theaters using his very special effects. And whether it's Phantom or Miss Saigon, Jekyll and Hyde or Ragtime, Cirque du Soleil or Inspector Calls, the best in special effects come from these very talented guys. Tish, why don't you begin?
I'd like to begin with a really basic question. What is the purpose, or what are the purposes of each of your design fields? I know some of you do more than one. Ann, could you begin? What are you trying to particularly accomplish in costume design?
Great opening question, Trish. Well, what do I want to accomplish is my life. It's my life. I was thinking the other day when I'm not working at the moment, and the fact that I'm not working, I don't have any personal phone calls. The only phone calls I ever get, or the only thing that involves me, has to do with my work. Everything I do is work related. I guess I set it up that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you design a costume, what is the purpose of the costume design? What are you focusing on accomplishing with the design?
Well, that's different. I never do a costume. It's usually, I never see one person on a stage at one time. I mean, that does happen, of course, but that's a rarity. It's a group of people moving in and out with one another. I do the clothes that the literature, the clothes that for the actor, the support of the actor, for the character that the literature describes. That's what I try to do without making it I'm not a big deal designer. I don't want everybody to say, what a great red dress, or what a whatever. It's just, that's not my thing.
But it just works for the actor.
I hope it does. I mean, and that happens in the fitting room, and then it gets on stage, and then the lighting and the director and whatnot. It's this collaborative thing. I'm sure we know that. But that's how I start, as clothes for the character, whether it's 17th century or now. They are where the underwear comes from and what happens to it when it's taken off, and that's my thing. Is that what you mean?
Yes,
is that the
that's,
question?
That's terrific. Michael, presumably lighting design has something more to accomplish than simple illumination.
Mm-hmm. I think the best way that I can think of to phrase it is you're trying to make things be seen as honestly as possible and in such a way that it supports the story that you're trying to tell. You can literally color the light or change the shape of the space with light to make it unrecognizable, and say, like a set design could be put up and the lighting design could change it radically, and that's not the goal. The goal is to sort of present what's there in as direct a way as possible to support the story that's being told.
Mm-hmm. David, what about scene design, if you could take that? Or if you have something further to add about lighting, please do.
It's the same thing. The point is, you've got actors, and where are they? Which doesn't necessarily mean the literal place. They're not necessarily in front of the kitchen or the bathroom. But it could be a space in the mind, but you locate your actors in some space, realistic or not. Sets, lighting essentially does that, as a simple answer.
Abe, what about sound design?
Well, there are two basic requirements or functions of sound design. First, as analogous to lighting, it's simple illumination. It's making sure that every seat in the theater that you're in hears what is being produced either by the actor, the singer, or the musician. So that's the common basic requirement of sound design, to allow everyone in the theater to hear what's being produced. And then on top of that, for a number of productions, it's also doing special effects and creating moods, or creating atmosphere, or creating an offstage effect that does what the playwright or the composer has asked you to do. But those are the two basic functions of sound: to make everybody aware of what's being done by the performer and to create the effect.
Greg, Abe mentioned special effects, presumably sound special effects. What about the other special effects?
Let me go to the basic question first. We're all serving the piece, the literature or the concept, because sometimes the literature and the concept are quite different. But we're creating that magic, that the overall picture, feeling, emotion. As Ms. Roth said, she doesn't like it when she doesn't go for what a beautiful red dress. I'm in a part of the theater where very often it's something can be spectacular and it is eye-catching, But my favorite effects are the things that are essential to the show, that come out of the show, that motivate and are less spectacular than the big flame ball or the big lightning blast.
But a director usually, they probably know more about costumes than they know about special effects. And when you're hired, when they ask you to join, do you find that they want you to take them somewhere where they never dreamt of going? Do they want to have some excitement, some volcano, something that, I don't mean literally, but I mean some...
Well, literally.
Yeah, of course.
But
I mean do they want you to lift them?
I'm sure it's the same for you. For some
Yeah,
directors they know exactly what they want, and I think they limit themselves by knowing exactly what they want.
Well, that's what I'm interested in.
My preferred way of working is when, as I'm sure yours, when you are part of the initial creative team that forms a concept. Nick Heichtner, Bob Crowley, and Natasha Katz on Twelfth Night.
Right.
We all, they wanted rain, they wanted water, but it wasn't, give me a rainstorm here now. It's how can we make this moment?
Or what kind of rain or what kind of water. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me be a little more specific about what I said. Yes, what a designer, what all of us supply, is who the actors are, where are they. But then you can achieve, and every one of us in his way does it, I believe, something specific. And a small example, I did a show, and the director, at this scene, the husband comes home in the middle of the day to find his, am I allowed to say this at Cooney? To find his wife in bed with a gentleman.
As long as he's a gentleman.
I'm being as...
Yeah.
Anyway, what the director wanted at this moment was that the front door of the apartment was in the middle of the stage, the bed was on that side, the toilet was on that side, the husband or wife, I don't remember, but it seemed important at the time, has gone to the John. So when the husband comes in, one of them is on one side and one of them is on the other. They can't get together. The husband's in the middle. The scene, the action, the spine of the scene, as he would say, is he looks one way, he looks the other. They cannot get together to face him as a group.
Yeah.
So not only is it where you are, what the apartment's like, but you've set up what is called the architecture of the action. Mm-hmm. You've put something there which very specifically moves the play in an exact direction at that moment.
Yeah, and actually, I think design as a whole, it's kind of the cumulative effect of a whole series of moments like that make the entire story appear inevitable. And I think that's what the most successful design is about, is when a whole series of those are strung together and the whole evening sort of just makes sense that way.
Where do you think the impetus for that comes from? Does it come directly from the play or filtered through the director? And what would you say is, for all of you, is your ideal relationship with a director? How much do you want from him or her?
About 15 years ago, I was invited to have that very discussion at Juilliard with students, young, very impressionable kids. And I, at that time, said that my main thing was to support the director, to help him realize his dreams or his vision. And I'm still getting guff from that. Do you understand why I am? Isn't that funny? I didn't. For years, I didn't understand why that would be a point of argument. Do you? Yes, you must.
Not necessarily.
Were
Not
people
necessarily.
They
saying that
were
it
saying
should be
things
the
like, "Are you
playwright?
crazy?" No. They were saying that I must get what I want first.
No, I understand it, because it's that question of whether we are artists or artists of occasion.
I don't see
No, I think we're hired
No,
to
but you're
serve
not
something else.
individual artists. You just mentioned collaboration, and,
Yes.
and the theater is a collaborative art. I mean, it sounds like and it is a cliche, but it's absolutely true. One can't work or shouldn't work without the other, I think. I think you'd agree to that, wouldn't you?
Well, I don't think any
Well-
of us can do anything without the other.
No,
Right.
but
No, we know that.
Yeah.
we have changes, I think, that have occurred, especially on Broadway over the last 20 years, and that we've gone through cycles. From the 70s through the 80s, it seemed to be the director was the one in charge. It was the director's medium, because we had the star director choreographers, especially for musicals, who had their vision and created the entire show based on what they thought the concept of that particular piece should be. And then, since that time, we have now gone back to what I call the management direction or production
Yeah.
of theater, where it's basically controlled by the producer and the manager. So it's their idea, and everybody works to what either their budget or their idea of that production should be. But in any event, the design team really is an extension of the authors and the composers, as well as the director, and it all needs to work together. And the best shows that I've been involved with are where, especially sound, was brought in as early as the time when the lighting and scenery people were brought in, because working together with everyone, you eliminate what I think is the biggest problem in working in the theater, and that's surprise. That's the one
When
thing
does
you
that
really
happen?
can't define.
When everybody is brought in together? Who comes first and then
Well,
falls into
I
place?
I find that it's usually scenery, because that's what develops and drives the entire production. Then costumes, because that's also part of it. But lighting and sound, I think, are as important as those two if you're trying to do an event or a production that is a real collaborative effort where everyone works together and you have a seamless display of all of the talents involved.
What sort of surprises have you encountered when that didn't happen?
Simple things such as the sound designer not being hired until after the show is in rehearsal or ready to start into the theater, and we find that the particular theater that you're in, the scenery has totally taken over the proscenium arch, so there's no place simply putting loudspeakers. So you have to compromise and put them someplace else, which leads to either a bad sound design or compromising the scenic designer's intention. Things of that sort. If that's all known in advance, you can eliminate all of that, or, as working with Neil, we've hidden things in the scenery so it becomes invisible and works. That kind of surprise that you have at the last minute, that's impossible to deal with.
Yeah, very often it's a real estate question. The first person to get there claims real estate and is very reluctant to give it up. But if, as you say, everyone is there from the beginning, once a piece of scenery is built, it's very expensive to go rework it and make space for something else. If you're there at the beginning, it's the same price. So why not be there from the beginning? I'd like to touch something that, your question about sound special effects, which relates to the collaboration. Effects work best when they are a sequence and an overlay of elements. If I just put a flame or explosion on stage without the support from the sound department, without the lighting level coming down so that it can make its statement, it doesn't work. And the eye and the mind of the audience is not pulled in and does not believe. But when you start overlaying elements, you start creating a whole piece.
Yeah.
But Ann's work is seen by the audience immediately. A lighting, other than special effects, is not seen by the audience. The effect that you get is something that happens, but the audience does not know that.
Well, what happens is every one of us is clever enough to manipulate this, or we wouldn't be sitting here. And I worked with a lighting designer once who was no one here, who was trying to make a name for himself, and he did, and it hasn't worked much since. And he did what he had to do to please everyone, to illuminate the actors. And then he spent the rest of his time and budget doing special effects which called attention to his skill, but had nothing to do with giving the stage a quality, helping the scenery to create the milieu which it was intended to do, and so forth. We've worked with directors who, troubled that someone might think it was the actor's skill rather than theirs, could do, there was a chap I worked with who, well known at the time, he's not alive anymore, poor fellow, who had a great deal of incidental music. And he would have the actors touch each other, ping, just at the moment when there was a musical effect. Now, this clearly couldn't be the actor's invention. It must have been the director's. So the show was full of things which could only be credited to the director.
Sure.
And we all can do these things. And it gets to be what you call survival time. People bail out, the show's going down the tubes, they might as well have their show, their part of the show look well.
I thought
And
it was
that's just
called ego.
miserable.
Yeah.
Where do you learn lighting?
Excuse me?
Where does one learn lighting?
Well, I'm special effects here, and I think we have some lighting designers who will answer that question.
Well,
Michael, where did you?
You sort of learn it by doing. I mean, it sounds silly to say, but you just go into a theater and turn the lights off and get your hands on the things and work with them. And you just keep doing that for years and years and years and years until you start to understand a little bit about how a light or a kind of light makes a space behave. And then you just try to start adding all that together in order to be able to control kind of an environment.
Remember that awful taste in your mouth in summer stock? When the sun's coming up and you still got 70 units to focus?
It's sad. It's
That's
sad.
when we all smoked.
No, actually, I will say that one of the best kind of learning environments that I've ever been in is being on tour with dance companies. I mean, I spent 6 or 7 years touring all over the world with Mark Morris's company and American Ballroom Theater and a couple of other companies. And it's when you have to walk into a room that you've never seen before and with a group of people you've never seen before and actually make something happen very quickly. It's just you have to make decisions very quickly, and you have to understand what's important about what it is you're doing and chuck everything else that's not important. If the going gets really tough, then if there's one thing you have to convey, then that's the thing you go for. And if you have a little bit more time, then you can make it a little bit more.
choices become more confusing.
Right.
You discover the essence of
What it is you're
the
doing.
piece and of the design.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good training ground, and every other lighting designer that has been in that same situation is also a big champion of it that I've found, because it's not only kind of a challenge, but it's a lot of fun too.
Touring.
Yeah.
With trucks?
No, usually walking off the plane into somebody else's building and trying to make their equipment.
Their stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. And in other countries.
Yeah, I mean
And in other languages.
the best example I can give is I was on tour in Taiwan once, and we missed our connection, and we checked into the hotel, and there was a big earthquake, and we went to the theater, and I walked in, and it was very dark, and I looked around, and people were hanging the lights on the wrong pipes, and things were a big mess, and you just kind of look around, and you think, I could be in New York. It doesn't matter where I am. So
Right.
It's
It's funny.
then you just try to start sorting it out and just kind of getting rid of the things that are not going to work, and just keeping it simple, and you kind of go ahead.
The sound design has always been basically something that you just pick up and do. Fortunately, in the last 10 to 12 years, many of the universities have established fine sound design, sound operating departments, as long as there are other design schools. And it's very important to start out there, but that's not the end. You really have to, as we all, I think, agree, go out and actually do it, and start in regional theater, start in community theaters, start just being involved in the sound of that production, and move on. And then I also always tell people, how did you get started? And what I do is find a designer, a sound designer, wherever, and bother them, call them all the time. And eventually something will happen where I'll say, come down and give me a hand doing this particular thing. And I think there are maybe 10 or 12 people that are working now that have done that to me over the years, and I've been very glad to have that opportunity to bring them along. About the road, I think it's unfortunate that touring companies today, professional touring companies, we no longer really have what used to be called bus and truck tours, where you would go in at 8 o'clock in the morning and do a show at 8 o'clock that evening with simple scenery, simple lighting, and very minimal sound equipment. It was a great spot to learn because the expectations weren't as high as they were for doing a Broadway show in that 8-hour period. Today, bus and trucks basically don't exist because they're trying to recreate as much as possible the effects and the scenery and the lighting of the Broadway or the national tour. So it's not a learning experience anymore. The audiences are demanding for the prices they have to pay for tickets what they would see in first-class national tours. But it's still a good place to learn.
But if you went to, let's say, southern Tunisia, as I have done.
I'm sorry.
Yes. And the electricity was less, and you have this truck with your stuff on it. Do you carry generators and...
That's, again, one of the things that you should know about so you don't have surprises, as I mentioned earlier. If you've properly advanced and you've done the collaboration with all of the people that are telling you to go to southern Tunisia, you would know, I would hope, that yes, it's going to be iffy if there's electricity available, and we have to bring along transformers or generators or things of that sort in order to do this particular show.
Do you guys do that?
We try to, if we get the opportunity.
Yeah, the advanced work is very important, but sometimes, no matter what they tell you, it's like you walk
So,
out.
Well, apart from the experience, which the one has gotten and no longer exists in every aspect of theater now, where do you find your trade? Where is the best way to find it? Are you teaching it? Do you have it in the universities? Are there courses in this, or are there special schools for it? Where do you start?
Well, in my university, yes, there are courses, although I've often frightened my students by telling them that designers are born and not trained. That I hope that my function as a teacher is to identify those students who have the real potential for going further, not just the artistic talent, but the temperamental talent and the fortitude, if you will, to stay with what it takes to become a designer and to strengthen those traits and to develop those skills that need more training. But to give people that divine spark that makes you want to be a theater designer, I don't know how to do it from nothing. But if you have that, and that's what you want, there are many fine schools with good people teaching who will at least give you the rudiments of the trade.
Oh, the discipline.
And the
Right,
discipline.
Sure.
And also enough, I would hope, anecdotal information that to sustain your interest and to make you want to go and collect a bunch of war stories on your own.
David, I see you smiling.
I do sometimes. even after all these years in the theater, I sometimes smile. You know, as an old guy, and with a new career, but looking back, you can complain about this or that, and you see things that have changed. The level of light, talking about Tunisia, the level of light that is required on stage now is what, about 1.75 times as much as it was when we started, Neil?
At least.
Almost twice as much light, or else people say they can't see the actors. What's the sound level over the last 30 years?
Well, it's absolutely increased simply because everybody is used to their home music systems or Walkman earphones, and so no longer do we have the imagination which tells you what a voice sounds like. It's what you've heard stored on CDs, and so it's got to sound like that recording in your living room.
And many actors are not expected to
produce.
Thank film and television for that.
Yeah, there's also a bizarre level.
In the old days, they say, well, I can't see I can't hear him because I can't see him. But now they wouldn't see him at all. I mean, they'd just see blackness or something. And, okay, we complain about that. I don't know if it's worth complaining about. We say there are no apprentices anymore. You may be looking at the youngest or oldest. As Neil said, I did the working drawings for the Mousetrap as an apprentice. I don't know if that word is still in the English language. And every kid, I'm talking about the theater of the deaf. A one-night stand, wonderful experience, but everyone wants to work for money right away, which is not so terrible, but no one had this idea that you could train.
Well, but
And
lot
yet
of
there's
people,
wonderful things happening around town, Broadway.
I tell
Beautiful stuff.
kids, if you go to some guy or some designer and say, I'll work for you for 6 weeks for nothing. If you like me, pay me after that. And I think that works.
Except the union can get after you. I'm not against the union. I tried that with people.
Well, I don't mean drafting, and I don't mean painting or drawing for me. I mean...
Getting coffee is not such a bad thing to do.
Absolutely.
Hang around a bit.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to do at my place. A lot.
Get a
How many
feel of what it
apprentices do you
is.
have?
I have a lot.
So what is a lot?
Well, it depends what I'm doing. Last year I had 3 last year. And they work very hard. Their hours are long, they work very hard.
Where did they
And,
come from to you? How did they come to you?
Oh, I get phone calls every other day.
They find their way. I had a phone call this morning from someone who
Yeah, a
wanted
lot
to
of people want.
become an intern or
do
apprentice
this.
on a production.
And-
Did we all work as apprentices? Did we all apprentice?
No, I got paid right off.
Did you?
Was that for painting scenery, or was that for doing, that's how you started in the theater, right? You were painting scenery. How did you parlay that into a career as a costume designer?
Well, the designer had a heart attack, and they were hard up for somebody to do the dirty work. And
you were
there.
there.
I was, and thrilled, and I just thought it was wonderful. I would like to go back to discussing this this thing about maintaining your inner burning desire to be a designer and servicing the collaborative essence. Because I know I saw your face go funny when I was talking about that. And what I meant was that I do think it's a great feeling to always be, I work with Mike Nichols a lot, and I would have to say we never see eye to eye, and yet we've worked together for 33 years. And if I can make him be less safe, because I tend to be more, and he tends to be tasteful. And now it's a joke between us. But that's the best thing, to have that true understanding of what's his shortcomings, what's my shortcomings. But meeting in the middle isn't the right answer. The middle is the lousy answer.
And would you prefer the director to be out ahead of you or behind you in that respect? Safer or more?
Well, I'd like to work with 8 directors, some out and some back. But I think out.
Yeah.
Yeah, tasteful is not a word I'm crazy about.
How do you handle it when director or producer starts interfering? I mean, how do you...
Interfering?
Well, about things they really don't know much about, or you're sure if they would just listen or let you do what you want to, that the show would be better. I mean, do you have examples of dealing with that, presumably tactfully or at least successfully?
They're still alive, so I...
You didn't murder them.
There are certain composers that I've worked with that certainly believe that the loudest thing on stage should be the flute and oboe. So you get to that point where they come to you at the sound console and tell your engineer to bring up the band, because that's the only way it's going to be exciting for the audience. And if the lyricist comes over and says he has to hear the words, then you have that discussion going on. And then the director wants to make sure that they're hearing all of the lines. And the producer says, don't make it that loud, it's bothering people. So I think the best, the sound designer anyway has to be the diplomat that handles all those different inputs to you, and at the same time, maintain the balance, and then do what I feel, or any sound designer feels, is the right thing to do for the piece that you're working on.
And tell them all that you did what they asked you.
Because sound is the most subjective, I think, of the design elements in the theater, you can get away with that a little bit more than I want a red dress, and you say, well, that is red, but it's blue. You can't really make that distinction. But sound, you can, because everybody hears differently, and that's the basic difference in all of the work that we do. But it is a matter of finding out who, again, is in charge. And if it's the producer or the manager or the director or the composer.
Who is in charge?
Depends on the show. It depends on who
So
the individual
that
is.
sometimes it is a
on the
director
show.
and
How? I mean, if the director doesn't do it, who's going to? I mean, the producer doesn't.
Sometimes the
Sometimes it
director
does.
is living in fear of the producer. We've been through
the
that.
director.
The
say that
director is
slowly.
hired by the producer is the same as all of us, and so he answers to him
And-
for
but
what
are
he
you
wants.
hired by the producer or
Yes,
the director?
and at the final, you may be recommended or requested by an individual director or a composer, but you are hired by the producer and the manager. That's the.
Do you audition?
I don't know.
Is there such a thing? How do they decide that you and
What? Get a job?
that you're going to be the
Well, I think at this
costume
point,
designer?
people know your
would like-
work, and so
Yes.
How do they
you're-
know
you're
that
done
your
by your past.
ideas are the same as theirs? That you see the production as a whole as they see it?
It's a gamble.
That's heavy.
You know, I've had several experiences where I've met on the big moment was you can't get the job unless you meet and talk to so-and-so. In some cases, it's a director that I've never met. In some cases, it's a producer. And in some cases, in one case, it was the widow of the playwright
Oh, yes.
who controlled the rights. And in none of those cases did I actually discuss the work at hand. I had them to my apartment. I served them tea or drinks according to their wont. We talked about everything in the world I could think to talk about of interest to them apart from the play at hand. In all cases, in these three cases, I got the job. And it was because once you enter into this, it's a kind of a marriage. You're going to go through the next X number of weeks or months with people, and you want them to be people who you do not detest on sight and who you have confidence will deliver the goods, but without showing a portfolio or auditioning or saying, well, we have to do it this way. That, in fact, is very dangerous because you may feed into some preconception that they have, and that will set off an alarm bell. It's much better to ease into those things after you're on board.
That is dead right.
Sorry
You
for
all
answering
agree?
my
No,
own
no, that's
Yeah. No, I think it is like a little tap dance audition that you do for them, and that, I think, is rotten. I think it's really difficult. But basically, no matter how very grave or serious it is, basically it is if you share the same sense of humor and love for the piece. If you get that, you can't, you are not destructive.
Well, I think that might be one of the good things that come out of meeting somebody who has the power in whatever production you're doing, is to have that discussion, not about the exact technical work that you do, but what your feeling is towards the piece and how you would get along and relate to all of them involved. And that certainly makes it a better collaboration no matter what you do, physically or technically. I've had to go and see people twice, I think, in my career to get the job, and it was merely a matter of talking to them, saying hello, and how we related to one another rather than the work we did.
How long ago was that?
My first Broadway show was in 1970, which was Jesus Christ Superstar.
Which was it?
Jesus Christ Superstar. I wasn't the original designer. I happened to be in town. They were having problems technically, and I came in and took it over. But the first show from scratch was shortly thereafter, Pippin with Bob Fosse.
All of you have credit so that they can say, well, look, they did such and such a thing. But what about the young person who is starting, perhaps done one or two things off Broadway? How do they get the job?
Off-Broadway for sound is as important and as sometimes more technically involved than a Broadway show.
Right,
So
but not
it's
having
theater.
been seen. They haven't the credits for it. They haven't the list of credits.
Then you
they
start
can
by
do.
talking to a designer and coming in and working with them on something. Again, as we talked about, working as an intern or an apprentice and working along. It's very, very, very
But
important.
don't you honestly think that, I did loads of off-Broadway shows, and I'm still working with those people. You
Yes. Yes.
build those, and they get married, and their ex-wives and their husbands. That's the basis of who I work with. It's the relationships that you build. I was going to say that if there is some distrust or worry with a director, or, I mean, I only deal with the directors. I would say, I would let him feel that I wouldn't let him be dismayed on stage. If he lets me show it to them and then he hates it, I'll change it. I've done that a million times. You're not blocked in. We can have anything we want in this world. Anything. Somebody got to pay for it, but we got to, but we can. And I think that we should, I mean, I like to let them feel that this is, that they can have they can have it all. There's no reason to not. Do you feel that way?
If you're not working together and enjoying the process,
Yeah.
why are you doing it? I mean, I'm sure we have all been on shows where we did not enjoy the process,
Oh,
but
boy.
But there's something about economics here that's
No,
considered.
no, we're not. We don't know about it.
Oh.
Well, that's the difference between it being being the director in charge, where the money and the economics are not as vital as it is when you're the producer who is in charge and money becomes the bottom line
Well,
for all
still,
that you
No,
do.
but
Smart.
if he says the costumes, I want the long dress that goes up the stairs, and
Exactly.
Anne knows that the long dress is going to trip the actor going up the stairs, but he insists upon it, and it's wrong, then there has to be another dress put in place. And therefore, it is the economics, and therefore I would think it is your responsibility to say, if he doesn't know, but look, I'll show you how this dress will trip you.
Sure, and you can make her a version out of an old piece of muslin and let her and go there at the end of the rehearsal day and rehearse with it. And you say, see, it works, or see, it doesn't work, or maybe it's a foot too long, or, you know, you work with them. That's what I do. You don't just go away and make a dress and say, here you are, see you in New Haven. It's part of the process to be there and to worry about it. And if the director says, get that thing off the stage right now, she's going to fall, I say, okay, but we tried.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's one of the big responsibilities of a designer, is to involve the director
Absolutely.
in things, in something they may not, to share your knowledge with them, convey your knowledge to them. This is, you know, you said this is what it means. Come here, let's talk about this, let's work with this, let's play with this, let's have fun with it.
Yeah.
And then you together come up with what's going to be the right thing.
Well, but
I agree that if you fail to work with your director, there is a big failure there, and there's an unhappy situation. And this should be sensed as the production team assembles. When you have to go to the producer because of a conflict, that's misery. But odd things happen. Let's say you're hired as the designer for a repertory company, and you're given the budget for the entire season. And the producer says to you, Dave, we got 6 plays to put on, here's the amount of money you can spend. But you got 6 different directors. Now, you're working well with each director. You may not exactly be his choice, maybe he isn't thrilled, but because of the repertory situation, it's good to have one set designer, even better to have one lighting designer. But a director wants something that's out of the budget. You've got to go to the producer, but this is understood beforehand. But if the producer doesn't back you up, and you're the villain, because you won't let this director spend money,
So
then
why can't
too
you
bad.
say, come on, you and I, director, are going to go see the producer. Let's ask him to come down here and discuss this with us.
Yeah, no,
Because
you
we're
say
all
that.
in this
You say
mud
that, but
bath
does the
together.
producer back you up?
Absolutely.
Does he say to the director, look, I gave this guy a budget, and I can't?
Well, you know, all these
Give you what you
producers
want.
have financial managers. Let them go to work. Let them come in and help you.
But it might involve more taste than the financial manager has.
No, but I mean, they can't just give you the money for a 6-season production and walk away. Get back here and go to work.
do.
Well,
When I used to work for New York City Opera, you'd go home after a long rehearsal, and the financial director would call you about something he didn't like about the lighting. The stage director would call you about something he didn't like about the costumes, which you weren't even doing. And the overall director would call you about the fact that the wheels are squeaking on something. I mean, everybody did everything.
yes.
But it was kind of fun.
Yes, absolutely. Because you all wanted the same thing.
You're all talking past tense. Is it not so today? Is it not the same way?
I don't think the human race has improved in an awful lot.
2 legs, 2 ears, 2 eyes.
Yeah. And people, you know, I worked for Balanchine all of those years, and at the initial, and he was, of course, the boss. And he had a fabulous eye, but the initial impulse came from Lincoln Kirstein, who in a sense was the producer. He's the one who'd call you and say, I want you to do this and that, come on down, I've got an idea. He'd pull out these wonderful old books and says, why don't we do it like a Wedgwood plate or something like that? And then you'd say, gee, does George know about this? And you'd say, oh, George, we always agree. So you'd do some sketches or model, and Mr. B would come in, and he always liked it. Well, unless he hated it. But I mean, it wasn't because of it wasn't because of the odd way that it started. Through Lincoln's vision and Lincoln's taste, which was extraordinary.
Yeah.
I think what you are saying here, though, they're all creative, and yet you're all dealing with somebody that is creative, but not in the same sense. You're talking about dealing with the reality of the person that is in charge of the show.
Well, everybody, to get along,
That's the
is
idea.
manipulative and thinks they're the greatest manipulator in the world, but all we forget is that people aren't as stupid as we think they are. So you just have to be careful as you go along.
Does anyone feel that producers now are less creative than before? Producers. Does anyone remember a golden age that I seem to have missed, when the producers were really creative people, and you could rely on their taste?
At least in the area that I deal with, production today is more about spectacle and large and big rather than about content. And the producers, in the 20 years ago, were able to give you certainly a show that brought people in and won awards and was very successful without going to the extent of spectacle. So the difference today is that you have to be about spectacle rather than about content, with some exceptions, of course. But the bigger is what's happening today, whether that's better or not, or whether it's justified by what ticket prices are. The audience needs to come in to see something that they can't see elsewhere. And live theater is something you can't see elsewhere. It has to be in a room with a collaborative group of people in the audience who are something you don't have in your living room. And so that's why theater is different. But as far as the spectacle is concerned, that's where it's gone today. And we hope it might get back to a more middle ground later on.
Although sometimes I think people are sort of thirsting for just the opposite. I mean, I think I was lucky to be able to work on something like Wit, but the reason people come to see that, I think, is because there's actually something going on that touches people, and there's nothing spectacular visually about the whole thing. It's there in front of you, and you watch a woman go through an experience, and that's, I think.
And but it is somebody live, and it's there, and
Right.
it's different. As I said, there are exceptions other than to what the spectacle is of
But
Broadway.
it's kind of weird because I think when there is something that's like that, people kind of sit up a little bit because everybody knows that it's the trend that's happened exactly as you're describing. But I think they're kind of looking for something that's a little bit more than that.
Or would the revivals of some of the plays that are on Broadway today, as good as they are, be the same if they were done without the spectacle of moving scenery and moving lights and heavy sound effects? You know.
Like what?
Well, there's a number of plays that have a number of revivals that have been on Broadway where the scenery is much more than it was when the show was originally done, and
Much more.
much more.
Rainmaker, for example, has never been produced with rain before, to my knowledge, other than this production. It was always, here comes the rain, curtain.
Oh.
Makes sense to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Maybe a point you brought up earlier was about the audience expectation from their exposure to film and television and attention span. I think it's a real issue, and I think it has some bad effects on the content of what we see on Broadway.
We used to do a lot of 3-act plays.
Yeah, with more actors.
With more actors, indeed.
Remember those 7 guys who came up from who came up from the cellar in
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Who could afford that?
And now they have wetsuits.
But there were more of everything than in other shows. We were talking about the revivals that are being done. Today, there were larger casts, larger pieces in the orchestra, larger everything in the original shows, and many times than in the show that's being done today. And it could survive that, and you can't afford it today.
Isabel, can I come back to say something that was initially part of this? I think young people who are aspiring people who are watching this, there is no such thing as nothing when we're talking about sets and lighting and costumes. No costume, what? A naked person makes the strongest costume statement you can possibly make. Black velours are not nothing. It's a terribly strong statement. Lighting, it's a little more subtle, but the same thing. A little more involved, but the same thing applies. Well, or just bare lighting is not no lighting. It's a strong statement. Everything we do is that. Everything must be considered in that way. Our town, sceneryless, is a very big scenic job in terms of touching up the back walls, putting just the brooms in the right places, the this in the right places. The Ray Sovey did it originally in 1937, I don't know. I did one. I did 2. Complicated job of doing no scenery, and the illusion in a sense of no light, but then how it changes into there being some light, but never too much. Nothing is all. There's no such thing as nothing. We deal with everything. We treat everything.
And yet a designer is not going to win a Tony Award for appreciating that something that looks like nothing but isn't is the best thing for the show.
Well, you just have to get rid of the idea that the Tony Award judges are the best judges of what we do.
Or that you're doing it for that reason.
Our job is to
Or
do
that
this,
you're
their
doing it
job
for-
is...
Absolutely.
Or that you're doing it for the Tony, absolutely.
But in sound, sometimes the absence of sound is actually part of the design, and there's nothing. If I may, when we opened the original company of A Chorus Line at the Schubert Theater here in New York, that show was done without body microphones on the performers, and it was part of the set were the 5 microphones across the front of the stage, the long tube shotgun microphones that the director, Michael Bennett, staged the people to every once in a while so you could go and hear them, and they were lit that way. But during the show, there was the part called Paul's Monologue, which is the one boy on stage going through his past life talking to the director out in the back. It's a very quiet moment in the show. It follows Music in the Mirror, the big Cassie dance number. It became a little difficult to hear him because of both the style of delivery as well as the quietness of the moment. And we went through a number of discussions. Are we going to put a microphone on him for this? And I realized that the problem was it was the middle of summer here in New York, and the air conditioning in the Schubert Theater was a little noisy, to say the least. So the design was that during the applause for Music in the Mirror, the engineer went and shut off the fans in the air conditioning. So you didn't hear them go off because there was the applause. As it got quieter in the theater, you heard him. It also got a little warmer, so the audience became a little bit more uncomfortable, which was the feeling that you were trying to get from the delivery of the lines. At the end of the monologue, the applause, they went into the tap combination, the fans and the air conditioning came back on. So that was sound design. That was the absence of sound being part of the design for A Chorus Line.
Who was the director?
Michael Bennett.
Michael Bennett.
Yes, but I know Michael Bennett, but who discovered that and who
Well,
gave
that was part
the
of that's what I did.
directions for
I mean, I went and I said, Michael, if we turn off the air conditioning, it'll be quieter in here and you might be able to hear him well enough. He said, try it. And that's what we did.
How did you start that? how did you to begin working with Michael on that, for example, and to get that effect?
Well, it was just part of the show. We were in the room, we weren't using microphones, and it was noisy. And as I was walking around the theater during rehearsals, I just heard the fact that there was a lot of noise coming from the air conditioning vents. And it was just a simple thought of turning it off that did that work. And it was just one of the nice moments that you come by in doing
that's
something.
one of the
But as you
collaborative
mentioned, the
things we're
absence of
talking about.
costumes, the absence of lights and scenery, Chorus Line was a good example of a black box lit by one light. But that's the design work.
That leads me into a question I'd love to have some responses on. You say that the shows now are about spectacle, and they get bigger and they get fuller, and then there's more stuff like rain in a play that never had rain before. And yet, if you go to the Opera House, and I will leave out the Metropolitan Opera, which marches to its own drum, you're likely to find an opera that would have had dozens of sets and tremendous spectacle 50 years ago being done with a single chair in an immense open space, apparently undesigned. And so here is one art form being pared to its essence, while another one is getting perhaps overstuffed. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
It's a very interesting.
Neil, my only comment is that the opera has content and doesn't need spectacle.
And got it in one, I think.
I mean, that's the difference. Not that the spectacle on Broadway is bad. I mean, some of the work that's being done, it amazes me how well and how good and how great it looks. But I'm just going back to saying that that's not the only thing you need to make theater vital.
We discussed Encore, the series that's being done in New York, in which you're going right to the core of the show itself and how well it works. It's a concert form. It's not a Broadway production. But in discussing it and taking really what is the heart of it, editing out all of the rest of it, it becomes a very strong piece.
Yeah, well, certainly the current Chicago has probably $250,000 less scenery than the original one did.
The strength of a more minimalist approach.
And is run 3 times as long.
Well, you've got the two sides. You've got the great big spectacle, which says, I'm getting my money's worth, and you're getting the other, which is a little nugget.
Abe, is it the emphasis on spectacle that you have been talking about that has produced a situation where we have Tony Awards in scenery, costume, and lighting, and is it because sound design is less obtrusive and it doesn't involve spectacle that we have no Tony in sound?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons that there's no recognition that way. But sound, for the most part, has been the last child in the family, and hasn't been thought of as a design element for a long time. And I am hopeful that will change in the future. I think the recognition of the design work that the whole team does is important. And I know that there are a number of reasons why it hasn't happened, but I'm hopeful that in the future there might be a change.
I think there's more that has to be said on that, but we have to stop for a minute, and everybody takes a deep breath and stretches and does whatever they have to do and comes right back down to their seats and continue with this discussion, because I think it's a most important and interesting one on the American Theatre Wing seminars. And so we'll come back to the designers.
Has it really been an hour already?
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theatre Wing seminar on working in the theatre. Before we return to our gifted panelists, I would like to point out to you that the Wing is more than a sponsor of seminars and more than our famous Tony Awards. This is granted for excellence in the theatre. But we are an organization whose year-round programs are dedicated to serving the theatre and the community with the goal of developing new audiences. And to achieve that goal, we have created audience development programs for students, like our introduction to Broadway, which began 7 years ago and has enabled almost 80,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, and for many of them, for the very first time. And through our theater in school programs, theater professionals like these in our seminar panels go directly into the classrooms to work with and talk to students about working in the theater. In addition, we have our hospital program, which dates back to World War II, and our legendary stage door canteens. Today's version of the program brings talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world to entertain patients in hospitals, senior day and nursing facilities, service organizations, and child care and hospice facilities in the New York area, bringing the magic of theater to those who cannot get to the theater themselves. We are proud of the work we do and are delighted with the wonderful working relationship we have with the theatrical community. We are indeed grateful to our members and everyone who makes possible all that the American Theater Wing does. And so now let's get back to our seminar on design, which is partly the most important part of the theater that the audience doesn't see, but which makes it all so magical for us. We have with us now Tish Dates, and we will continue with the discussion on the design seminar. So Tish, would you like to start that right away?
Yes. Have any of you ever wished that you could go back and change something about a design you've already completed?
Well, not so much one individual design, but when I first started bringing sound into Broadway theaters, I think I would have greatly preferred had I been able to be a little bit more tasteful then. We tried to do it too big, too fast, and we didn't have the quality of equipment and the expertise that's now available to us. So we did, I think, tried to do a little bit too much at the beginning. And I think it's led on to the fact that sound has had the opportunity to be criticized by audience members, by the critics and the press, and also by the fact that it's gotten bigger than the shows itself, where I think some of the design elements have lost sight of the fact that it really should sound like it's coming from the performer or the musician, and rather from the affected loudspeakers and things that are placed in the theater. Goes back to the beginning. Maybe that designer wasn't there when the set designer laid out the set, so he's forced to put speakers far enough away that it loses the localization. But I think that's the one thing that I probably would have liked to have changed, was to gone a little bit slower right at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think for me, it's becoming more and more a question of actually getting to the point where you can polish the work enough. Because there comes a certain point in any production where you have to stop. You know, like they turn the lights on, you're told that that's it, and then you have to come, stand in the back and kind of just watch what you've done. And I think at a certain point you just wish you were either faster or had just like that one little bit of extra time to finish those extra 2 cues that you weren't quite as good as you would hope that they would be.
Have you ever gone back after an opening and changed a design element?
When we do different companies, I mean, things changed obviously from the time we did Evita in London at the very beginning until we did it in America. So yes, you were able to see what you did in the first place, and then hopefully the improvements you've added were worthwhile. Going back after a show is already open or running for a while in one location is usually not really pleasing to the producer.
Except for something that is unfortunately becoming more common is when you're asked to come back to the show that's been open 6 months or 9 months and reduce the running expenses, which is something I have a hard time with. I think if you're running the show, advertising under the reviews you got on one situation, to cut back your production values, I think is not right, not correct.
I lost a job doing something like that. I read the script, talked to the producer. I said, it's a one-set show, but you've got this one little scene here, which is just a one-joke scene. If you can get that joke and work it into the other set, you're going to cut that little set out anyway when you tour this show, if it's successful. You're going to have a tour of one setter. You're not going to have this two-setter just for that joke. Well, he didn't want to hear any more from me. So I didn't do the job, and they did the show, and it was successful, and then they toured it and didn't do that little scene. But this sort of sounds like I told you so-ism. But sometimes you take remember there was a 6-set show, and I put it into one set with the director. Then it's wonderful because you see the stage directions. The stage directions instruct you what to do, what you have done. Whereas the initial stage direction said, well, it's 6 scenes.
The playwright designed the show, right?
As a producer, I've had a chance to redo shows that were successful that we had done once before. And in every case, they weren't as good. We thought they'd be better because we had experience, we saw our mistakes. They were never as good.
Really?
And when I was I call myself a little boy. When I was a kid and coming into New York, I met a man named Paul Chelychev, Pavel.
Of course.
How
He
do you
said-
feel about sound, the thing that's happening today, and the synchronization in the theater? Where does sound come into that, and our sound engineers?
Well, you know, I'll tell you something, Isabel. When I go to the theater, I fall instantly asleep, so I'm really no judge. the angel of sleep, after all those productions, all those hours and days in the dark theater, I can't stay awake at theater anymore. My wife takes me, we sit there and I fall asleep. She tells me what it was about, and so I'm no judge of this. But I want to say that Paul Chelychev said to me, you know, kid, he said, or youngster, whatever you call me, the dream and the reality are no different. Don't try to catch a dream again. And so that's why I don't like revivals.
David, as a producer, how did you deal with your own designers? Let's hear from you from the opposite perspective.
Well, you never know who's going to be terribly valuable to a continuing long... I produced a theater company that ran for 35 years. And we've been to not 5, not 6, but 7 continents. Get that. The most valuable person on my team was the costume designer. I'm talking about Fred Volpel. Not simply because he was a fine designer and understood the needs of repertoire and budgets and so forth. He certainly can. He could make everyone cry. But because Fred would read the play and give everybody else a real drubbing on what the devil it was about. You'd sit there with Fred. It sometimes seemed like root canal work. But he'd say, come on, who is it? Well, what do you expect of this character? And the director suddenly realized he had no idea what was going on. Why is he different than him? Why do you want him this way? And it could have been the lighting designer, it could have been the set designer, but it happened to be Fred, who read the plays in this way and challenged us all on what every character meant.
Well, I tell you something. Very recently, I had a dialogue with the director who was going to do a new play, and the producer was present, the money person was present, the line producer was present. It was a little bit of an audience, and it was me to meet the director, and I said, well, I'm not going to meet him unless I've read the script, because it's not a personality test. So I read the script, and I got there, and they started asking me questions. Well, I don't like to make decisions that quickly. I have to think about it. So I asked the director a question, like, how much money does this guy make a week? And he and I went right for it, because he was going for my jugular, and I was a little testy about it, and he very much resented it. He didn't want to be pinned down, and I didn't want to be pinned down. And that was the first time that happened. The costume designer always has that. There's millions of questions that come into your mind. Where did those shoes come from? Does his mother do his laundry? Blah, blah, blah. It goes on forever. And it is often resented.
Remember when we started, Ann, years ago? We were about the same generation. And before all these lawsuits, and you could sock people. Remember when you just punch them in the nose, and it was all right. You know?
A very simple question. Where are costumes made now? There used to be Eves and Brooke Brothers. Are there organizations like that
Certainly.
now? Are there
Certainly.
costume?
Absolutely.
Where? Here in the East?
Here in the East, in Rome, in London, in California, in New York. Yes,
There are the Eves and
Absolutely.
the Brooks. And,
Well, Eves and Brooks have combined. That's one company. Great rental houses are not in this city. There is not a great rental house.
how much rental is being done in shows?
Well, you would do it if it were here. It isn't here.
Can I jump in here? There's something I've been dying to ask Michael. At the end of Wit, there's this incredible lighting effect that you achieve. There's a blazing, ethereal light on the Vivian Baring character who's dying of cancer. It's an unusual lighting effect on someone who's dying, and particularly because you create this luminescence around her naked body. How did you come up with that design effect?
Well, it basically came about from the first meeting that I had with the director. I went over to his house, and he had a little model, the initial model sitting there, and he was showing me what the set designer had come up with, and said, this last moment of the show, can she be really bright? And I said, okay. And then so we continued talking for a few more minutes, and then we got through a few scenes, and then he said, can she be really, really bright? And I said, okay. And then about right as the meeting was ending and we were shaking hands and leaving, he said, I want her to be really bright. And so I think after the third repetition...
Yes, I get it.
You're not that slow a learner.
but it just sort of led me to think that I had to do something extraordinary, like just not just pull whatever was in the inventory and stick it up in the air, but really think about how to really push it a little bit.
It's a transcendent effect appropriate for somebody who has specialized in Death Be Not Proud. Yeah, it's great.
Michael, how oblique can a director be in giving you a wish?
They can be very passive about it, and then you have to really sit there and think, now what exactly did they just ask me to do? And so you have to sit there and sort of translate their intent, and if they're not very forceful personalities, then you have to sort of supply that for them, I think.
That's almost the case with every one of our disciplines, isn't it? That you really have to hear through the words to what it is they really want, or what it is you think they want.
And sometimes, especially in the case of lighting, they don't necessarily know, because I think lighting is sometimes more difficult to talk about because you can't grab it or look at it or show somebody a magazine picture of it. So a lot of the time what you're doing is you're showing them what you think they want to see, and then that's the basis to start a conversation about that's not quite right, or we need to modify it this way, or that's exactly the opposite, I'd rather do this. And it's more of just a way of having a conversation too.
I get this all the time. It's what I call the I know exactly what I want, and when you show it to me, I will tell you. And by the way, how much does that cost?
On that note, I'm going to have to bring this to a close. And thank you so much for all of your caring and knowledge that you have shared with us as to what makes, for me and for almost everybody else that goes to the theater, the true magic in the theater, making it all come alive by what you have created, the design team of the Broadway or off-Broadway and off-Broadway theater, the live theater. You make it all come alive for us. And thank you so much for being on this panel of the American Theater Wing seminar on working in the theater, which is coming to you from the Graduate Center of the new University of New York. Thank you so much for being here.
Survive.